Michel de Montaigne was a thinker who championed the solo existence. A French Renaissance middle class lawyer and civil servant, he retired from public life at the age of 38, locking himself away in near total reclusion in the southern tower of the Chateau de Montaigne in order to contemplate the nature of things and write his illustrious essays. Witness to the heinous crimes and carnage of the Huguenot Wars, Montaigne became increasingly skeptical of the motives of religion, politics, and all forms of societal regulation, preferring to put his trust in reason alone. His writings, informal, personal compositions reflecting upon subjects as diverse as the education of children, cannibals, smells, prayers, the human mind, thus became a means for examining his own conscience, illustrated by his motto, "What do I know?" The essays in his collection on solitude has a very loose structure. Whether it is on the topic of books or anger or fear or sleep, Montaigne seems to meander his way through these various topics, giving the reader the sense that he is simply gabbing. It helps that Montaigne is well read and educated, so even in this wandering, the reader is learning, growing, and thinking. Although they contain much philosophy, they themselves are not a philosophical treatise. Montaigne is not attempting to make an argument, he is simply figuring out what he thinks as he goes along. Only in solitary confinement, he says, is it possible to take stock of our lives, dissolve attachments, and rediscover peace. Indeed, exchanging one set of circumstances for another, livelihood, career, spouse, is merely exacerbating the problem, and the cycle of pain and suffering will persist until we have repossessed our own souls. He concedes that the renunciate life is not always possible for the average man. We must remember that Montaigne was extremely wealthy and therefore had the economic means to live separately from society. Nevertheless, in the manner of Eastern philosophy advocating dispassion and detachment, we must develop a state of living whereby we reside in the world and yet are not of it. He says, wives, children, and goods must be had, and especially held, by him that can get it. But we are not so to set our hearts upon them that our happiness must have its dependence upon them. We must reserve a back shop, wholly our own and entirely free, wherein to settle our true liberty, our principal solitude and retreat. And in this we must, for the most part, entertain ourselves with ourselves, and so privately that no exotic knowledge or communication be admitted there. There to laugh and to talk, as if without wife, children, goods, train, or attendance, to the end that when it shall so fall out that we must lose any or all of these, it may be no new thing to be without them. We have a mind pliable in itself that will be company, that has wherewithal to attack and to defend, to receive and to give. Let us not then fear in this solitude to languish under an uncomfortable vacuity. Moreover, in the twilight of our years, we should not fear a descent into solitude and silence, but rather embrace it willingly, regarding such a state as release from worldly demands and obligations, leaving us the space and time to caress our spirits and soothe our souls. He says, we must break the knot of our obligations, how strong soever, and hereafter love this or that, but espouse nothing but ourselves. That is to say, let the remainder be our own, but not so joined and so close as not to be forced away without flaying us or tearing out part of our whole. The greatest thing in the world is for a man to know that he is his own. It is time to wean ourselves from society when we can no longer add anything to it. He who is not in a condition to lend must forbid himself to borrow. He also says, our forces begin to fail us. Let us call them in and concentrate them in and for ourselves. He that can cast off within himself and dissolve the offices of friendship and company, let him do it. In this decay of nature which renders him useless, burdensome, and importunate to others, let him take care not to be useless, burdensome, and importunate to himself. Let him soothe and caress himself, and above all things be sure to govern himself with reverence to his reason and conscience to that degree as to be ashamed to make a false step in their presence. He continues, "You have devoted your life to the light. Devote what remains to obscurity. It is impossible to give up your pursuits if you do not give up their fruits. Renounce all concern for name and glory. There is the risk that the radiance of our former deeds may still cast too much light upon you and pursue you right into your lair. Among other gratifications, give up the one which comes from other people's approval. As for your learned intelligence, do not worry about that. It will not lose its effect if you yourself are improved by it. Remember the man who was asked why he toiled so hard at an art which few could ever know about. He said, 'For me, a few are enough, one is enough, having none is enough.' He spoke the truth. You and one companion are audience enough for each other. So are you for yourself. For you, let the crowd be one and one be a crowd. It is a vile ambition in one's retreat to want to extract glory from one's idleness. You must do like the beasts and scuff out our tracks at the entrance to our lairs. You should no longer be concerned with what the world says of you, but with what you say to yourself. Withdraw into yourself, but first prepare yourself to welcome yourself there. It would be madness to entrust yourself to yourself if you did not know how to govern yourself." Montaigne's conclusions do not meet modern sensibilities. They do not summarize or tie up the information or leave the reader with one last thing to contemplate. Instead, when he is out of thoughts and examples on the subject, he simply ends.